Hello and welcome everyone, and welcome to this session of valuation, where we are going to study your 100 marks paper SPM and BVM. And guys, 50 marks is held by SPM and balance 50 marks is held by business valuation. So this entire paper is focused on valuation. What is the need of valuation? What are the spheres of valuation? What are the laws are surrounding valuation in India and abroad? Why is valuation needed? What are the uses of valuation? What is the difference between valuation and price? And several other things we are going to study in this particular subject. And before starting the subject and before telling you what are we going to study in this subject, let me also tell you what are we not going to study in this subject. As we are not going to study accounting standards in this subject, we are not bothered about the accounting concept, we are not bothered about the accounting fundamentals. Whatever accounts does is accounting prerogative. Accounting standards, Ind AS, we are not bothered about any Indian accounting law, because valuation is not governed by Indian accounting law. No, we are also not going to study about income tax methods of valuation. So income tax suggests certain methods of valuation. We are not going to study those methods as well. No, we are also not going to study the methods of valuation prescribed by RBI or FEMA regulations in respect of international transactions. We are not going to study that as well. Sir, we know what are we going to study. So we are going to study micro and macroeconomics, pricing strategies, where the incidence of supply and demand meet. That is the pricing strategy of any product, and sir, that is how we are going to come at the price. Answer is no. We are also not going to study economics in this particular subject. These are a complete no. We are not going to study any of these. So then what are we going to study? Okay, so before coming on to what are we going to study, let me start off with a fundamental question. Do you know the difference between price and value? So we have a fair bit of idea, but let's discuss what is the difference between price and a value. So guys, price means, and certainly these things are not same. If you think that so they are similar to each other, they're not similar, they're not same, they are absolutely different from each other, and they are bang opposite of each other. So never use them synonymously, because they are not the same. Then so what is the difference between price and value? Guys, price means the intersection of demand and supply, the accumulation of buyer and supplier in a perfect competition scenario, or in a monopoly, or in an oligopoly, or in a duopoly. How would that result in a particular price? So price is an interplay of demand and supply and all economic conditions, be it macroeconomic conditions or microeconomic conditions. It is entirely dependent upon economy of a particular country. That is how price of a particular product or particular thing or particular property or particular business organization is determined. Now the question arises, sir, now how is value very different from price? Value is absolutely different from price, guys. So value represents the worth of a particular thing. Price can be higher or lower than the worth, because demand and supply are not governed by the worth. They are governed by the suppliers and the customers intersection. They are governed by that particular factor, economic factor. So price can either be higher than the worth of a particular thing when demand is more, or price can be lower than the worth of the thing when demand is less. Then so the big question is, what is worth of a particular thing? What is value? Guys, value is at a particular point in time, how much benefit are you going to derive from that particular asset, that particular commodity, or that particular property, or that particular thing. That is determined by value. So value is nothing but the worth of a particular thing or a commodity or a particular asset. That is known as value. Sir, can you give us an example of what are the key characteristics, what are the key differences between value and price, and can you by an example illustrate situations where value is too high and the price is really low? Absolutely, I can. So there is a classic controversy, and there is a classic example of the diamond paradox. And what is this diamond paradox, guys? Diamond paradox means, let's study this box. Okay, diamond paradox means There are two commodities which we are going to study in this particular example, guys. One is water, one is diamond. You know both the things, water and diamond. Diamond is pretty expensive in terms of pricing. Water is pretty cheap in terms of pricing. So diamond can start from thousands of rupees, 20,000, 30,000, and go up till crores and crores of rupees. However, water starts at 50 paisa and ends at 20 rupees or 50 rupees or 100 rupees maximum. So there's a huge amount of difference between water and diamond. Of course, sir. There's a lot of difference in the prices and not the value. Now let us come on to the value. Now suppose I make you immune of the prices of diamond and water, and I tell you that you would not be impacted by any prices, and pricing is same for both water and diamond, and don't worry about the pricing, and just tell me for your preference, what is your preference, whether would you like to have water first or would you like to have diamond first? What is the answer to this question? If there's no pricing difference, they are both equal, they don't have any differentiation in terms of price, and in future also they won't have any differentiation in terms of price. What is your priority? Of course, the priority will be water. Water's value, water's worth is much higher than diamond, because you cannot eat diamond, but water is an essential element for your existence, for any human being's existence. So the value of water is quite high, however the price of diamond is quite high. Now there can be some female students of mine who can say that no sir, for us diamond is more valuable than water. That is an exception to this rule, guys. That's okay, and this was on a lighter side. So let's come on to the definition, and let's see what are the examples given for this diamond and water paradox. So guys, value is the worth of a thing. Worth of a thing. What is the worth of a particular thing? It can also be defined as bundle of benefits expected from it. What are the cumulative benefits which are expected from a particular thing? That is value. Value is subjective term, as what is a specific measured value to one person may not be the same for another. So value might differ from person to person. I'll give you an example. So there is a place called Kota. Kota is famous for its coaching institutes for engineering. So a coaching institute which wants to purchase a property in Kota, it might be ready to pay a premium for that property, because coaching institutes know that Kota attracts a lot of engineering students. However, a businessman, a normal plastic or a ceramic businessman, would not pay a premium for a property at Kota, because for that businessman, Kota is like any other place, is like any other building, or is like any other factory. It's very similar. He could buy that same factory in, say, some other place, Vadodara, or some other place, Ahmedabad. So value differs from person to person. However, price is generally constant for every person, because price is governed by market forces. Therefore, price is price doesn't undergo a lot of change. However, value undergoes a lot of change. So what is price? Price is what is charged by a seller or provider of product or services. Many a time it is a function of market forces. So mostly it is a function of market forces. Now sir, let us see what is the distinguish between value and price. What are these two? How are these two things different? So guys, price is amount of money or consideration asked for or given in exchange for something. When you exchange two things, then that exchange is known as price. Price is an outcome of transaction. So price is governed by transactions of buying and selling, buying by the buyers and selling by the sellers. So this transaction leads to a particular price, fixation of a price, and that is how price is determined. However, value exists even when transaction is not there. Value is a persistent thing attached with a particular commodity or a particular asset, which even if transaction is not there, value will be there. Value envisages anticipated benefits or utility which would be derived from something. So the benefits which will be derived, that is governed by value. Price is ascertained on the basis of demand and supply forces existing in the market. So price is developed by demand and supply forces which is existing in the market. However, value is measure of expected benefits of a particular thing. Value is not governed by the demands and supplies of a particular product in a market. No, value is governed by benefits derived from a particular thing. So how would we calculate benefits derived from a particular thing? We have methods. We have internationally accepted methods of ascertaining how can we anticipate benefits of a particular thing. And guys, let me at this point in time tell you very, very bluntly and factually, guys, in India, there is no precise law for valuation. There is no code written, there are no sections written for valuation. Valuation is again in India a very, very open area, just like the entire world. The assumptions would affect your value terribly. There are no set guidelines or standards on how valuation should be done, what assumptions should be put in while valuing a particular product. There are no guidelines. But yes, Income Tax Act through Rule UA and Rule 11U, there are two rules for valuation in income tax, 11U and 11UA. Through that, Income Tax Act tries to portray or tries to put forth certain sections and regulations for valuation, but it is not a complete wholesome code in itself. Apart from income tax, there are no standard guidelines which can be followed by any valuer. So it's a very, very open area. So it depends on the valuation expert who's doing the valuation, what kind of valuation can he expect. So it's a pretty so to say unexplored or unventured India as of now, not only in India but also the entire world. So the fundamentals are very clear, but the exact formula or exact precise way of doing valuation is not formulated legally. There's no law surrounding valuation. So sir, how will we study valuation in this particular subject? Guys, we'll be studying the international theories and international techniques and ways which are suggested by big economists, big theorists and leaders in past who've done valuation experts of big companies. They've given certain theories. We'll be studying valuation on the basis of past existent literature on particular value. Yes, so that is the way. Okay, next is price is ascertained from customer's perspective. Price is always focused on the customer who's going to buy that particular product. Price is determined from his perspective. Value is ascertained from user's perspective. So value is to be derived by the user. User of a particular financial statements tells you what is the particular price of a particular thing. Because user will always weigh the benefits of buying and using that particular thing, because we need to understand worth is always derived by the person who is going to take benefit from that particular thing. So there's a very minute difference between consumer and user. Consumer means a person who's just buying that particular product. He may or may not use it. However, user means a person who uses that particular product. Sir, what is the difference? We are not able to understand anything. I'll give you a precise example. Guys, Nestle Maggie. We love eating Maggie as a snack in evening times, and on Sundays we love to eat Maggie. Yes, sir. So in my home, what is the scenario? My mom brings Maggie and we force her to bring Maggie. She doesn't eat Maggie. She doesn't like smell of Maggie, the texture and the vision and everything. She doesn't like anything about Maggie. So Maggie is like torture for her. But because we insist, ask her to bring Maggie, that's why she brings Maggie. So guys, when she buys Maggie from the market, my mom, she is a consumer who's going to consume this particular product for the benefit of her children. So the user is the children and the consumer is the mom. That is the minute difference between user and consumer. Consumer will consume the product for his or someone else's benefit. However, user is the person who is the direct beneficiary of a particular product. So as a consumer, my mom will be determining the price of that particular Maggie, and she'll be comparing, okay, Top Ramen Maggie is priced so and so, Nestle Maggie is priced so and so, the cheaper one is this, so I'll buy this. She might do something like that. But as a user of Maggie, I will tell my mom that, Mom, Top Ramen's Maggie is not that tasty. I'm just giving an example. This is not true, but I might say that, mom, Top Ramen's Maggie is not tasty. So even if the Nestle Maggie is 5 rupees more than Top Ramen's Maggie, you should buy Nestle Maggie. That is a true verdict from a valuer, because the worth of a particular thing can only be ascertained by the user and not the consumer. So that is the difference between consumer of a particular product and user of a particular product, because worth of a particular thing can only be appreciated by a user and not a consumer. So price is determined from the perspective of consumer. Consumer is the person who's buying or selling a particular thing, and the value is ascertained only and only by user. So my mom cannot ascertain value of Maggie. Only I can ascertain value of Maggie. Only you can ascertain value of Maggie. Moms cannot ascertain value of Maggie. They can only ascertain price of Maggie. Okay, sir. So market forces have great impact on price. Market forces derive price, they regulate and modulate price. So price is a direct correlation of market forces, and market forces have minimal or no impact on value. On value, there is no impact on market forces, because value is worth of a particular thing, and even if someone else is saying that no, this thing is not worthy, I would not trust that person, because I am the user and I know it's worth his for me it's worth his more. If other person is not finding it worthy, I would say to hell with that person. I am not interested in listening whatever that person is saying. I find this thing good, so this thing is really important for me, so it is valuable for me, so I will definitely buy this particular thing. So that is the price, the difference between price and value. I hope on a very very broad perspective you've been able to appreciate what is the difference between price and value. And now the famous diamond paradox. Guys, this is a beautiful example which we have already discussed to appreciate the difference between price and value. Let us see what is it. This can be explained easily with the popular example of water and diamond. Water is much more important for us to survive. Still, it is of low price, while diamond is just used for ornamentation and nobody dies without it. Is priced very high. The reason behind this is its value, as value of water is much for us, it is available at low price, while the value of diamond is less for us, therefore it is available, therefore it is priced high. So there is a paradox, there is a contradiction between the value and price of diamond and water, and this is how we explain the difference between value and price. So now just I've given you a gist of what are we going to study in the next 70 hours or 80 hours or 90 hours of this particular lecture. We are going to study the valuation of a particular thing, how to find out the worth of a particular thing, how to find out, how to gauge how important is this thing for a particular person, and how beneficial would it be if I acquire this particular thing. This is what we are going to study in this particular subject called valuation. Okay, sir. Now we got the gist of the subject, valuation. So, sir, a question is coming in our mind, sir. Is valuation a practical subject? Yes, guys. Valuation is an absolutely practical subject. So, if I talk about cost and management audit, it holds 70-30 ratio, which means that 70% of the paper is practical, or at least 65% of the paper is practical, and balance is a theoretical paper. But the theory is also practical based. So, but strictly speaking, the numerical portion of it, that is of about 65 to 70 marks. But this particular subject, business valuation, which contains 50 marks, is entirely practical. So this entire subject, 50 marks, is entirely practical. The balance portion, which is SPM, guys, that 50 marks is split between a ratio of say 35 to 15 marks, 15 marks being theory and 35 marks being given to practical. That 15 marks may sometimes extend to 5 more marks, 20 marks, and balance 30 marks is all practical. So largely about 85% of this entire paper is practical and 15% is theory. And yes, if you practice this paper well, I am at the cost of reiteration, I am stating that you stand a chance of attaining 70 marks in your examination in this particular subject, and that will easily qualify or cross you the hurdle of getting an aggregate of 50% marks. So yes, that is the benefit of this particular subject. So sir, okay, we got the gist of this particular subject. What are we going to study, what are we not going to study, and how are we going to study it? We've got the gist. Now sir, let us start a particular chapter of this particular subject. Okay, so guys, today we are going to start the most important chapter of this particular subject. The chapter's name is Valuation of Mergers and Acquisitions. Sir, why this chapter? Why not any other chapter? Guys, my purpose or my intention of starting with this chapter is that this is the most important chapter of your syllabus. Why I'm telling you this is that in December 2019 attempt, this chapter has come for mind-boggling 30 marks. Out of 50 marks of business valuation, 30 marks was mergers and acquisition. And for entire past attempts, if you see the past attempts, this chapter has been consistently coming for at least bare minimum 20 marks. So this is the most important chapter of your syllabus. So yes, we are starting with the valuation of mergers and acquisition. So what is the difference between art and a science? So science follows square jacketed formulas and approach towards everything. For science, there are universal laws which are applicable in the entire universe, and they do not change with change in country, state, condition, or any place. They do not change. They remain constant in the entire world. That is science. And science can be learned through bare formulas or through bare application of a particular concept to a practical situation. That is how science works. There is no role of practice in science. However, art is not bounded by any law, is not bounded by any regulation. There is no square jacketed formula which can cull out what is there in art and which can tell you how art is. So art is basically personality based. A person may be different from another person. Two artists are never the same. They are different artists and they might be doing drastically different things on drastically different principles, and both of them are artists. So art is little different from science because it does not follow a particular strict pattern which is followed by science. It does not follow formulas or some regulations or some universal laws which are followed by science. Art can be developed through practice. More you practice, more you become good at art, because art is all about personal application of whatever there is in your mind. That is art. So we were faced with a question in our 11th and 12th standard while studying business studies. Guys, the teacher used to ask us whether management is art or science. And we always used to say, sir, management is an art because management differs from place to place, person to person. No two people are same in terms of their managing skills, and managerial skills vary from person to person. Therefore, management is varying thing from a person to different person. So management is an art and not a science. This is what we used to study in our 11th and 12th standard commerce. Yes, absolutely. You got it right. Art and science are two different things. Now the question is valuation an art or a science? Are there any square jacketed formula which can lead you to value and which can assist you in valuation, which you can just quickly mug up and say that yes, this is the value of a particular company? Can you say that? Answer is a big no. Valuation is not a science. It is rather more of an art which you develop through practice, through your experience, through seeing the effect of a particular assumption on your valuation and effect of another assumption in your different valuation. That is how art works, and that is how valuation works. So I would not say that there is no element of science in valuation. There is little element of science in valuation as well, but predominantly the characteristics of art are imbibed in valuation and not the characteristics of science. So yes, to answer this question, is valuation an art or science? I would definitely go for art, because the major portion of valuation is dependent upon your personal application of your experience, and there are no square jacketed formulas, especially in Indian scenario. There are no techniques and no standard assumptions which I can tell you so that you can just propel or just succeed in this particular art. No, that is not possible. So yes, valuation is more of a science rather than an art. Okay, so now let's start our main chapter, valuation of mergers and acquisitions. This is the heading of our chapter, and I've already told you the importance of this particular chapter. Very, very important, guys. From an exam perspective, then from a transaction perspective, after you've joined a big company, companies are undergoing a lot of restructuring in these days. They're acquiring new companies, they are siphoning off their particular the departments, they are splitting up, they are entering into several forms of restructuring. So yes, mergers and acquisition hold a very, very important element or a leg of any corporate world. And guys, this particular thing is going to help you not only in your examination, not only while studying this subject, but also in long run in your career. This mergers and acquisition is going to help you a lot. So yes, if you are wanting to be a CFO or a costing director of a particular organization, then you cannot shrug your hands from this particular concept called mergers and acquisition, which incorporates everything, be it restructuring, be it realignment of a corporate agenda, be it realignment of your financing decision, dividend decision, investment decision. Everything is covered under mergers and acquisitions. So there are two words involved in this particular chapter, mergers and acquisition. Do you remember accounting standards which tell you about two types of mergers? Mergers through purchase, merger through taking cash, or there are different type of mergers, and the accounting entries of different type of merger differ depending upon what kind of merger is it. So there are different kind of mergers as per accounting standards. Please forget all that thing which you have studied in CFR. We are not bothered about all those things. What kind of mergers are there? We are not bothered about kind of mergers, because we just know that merger means when two companies amalgamate together to form a new company, or when an existing company takes over another company. That is merger. Both of things are merger for us, and we won't differentiate between the type of mergers. Our treatment for merger will be consistent all through, be it whatever type of merger you want to say. So yes, we don't follow the accounting standards norms or accounting standard classification of mergers. Our mergers means mergers of two different organizations into one organization, and that is merger for us. Acquisition is also a extended arm of merger, whereby an existing firm acquires another firm, and yes, that is also a form of merger. So we do not distinguish between these two terms. However, we are going to study valuation. How would you value a particular entity which you are going to undertake, or which one entity is going to absorb in itself? We are going to have a detailed discussion on how to value this particular company. But before starting the actual final syllabus of mergers and acquisition, let me take you through certain basic concepts which we have studied in Inter. So before starting our concept of mergers and acquisition, guys, let me take you through the certain basic concepts which we have studied in our Inter examination, and even in your group 3 you must have studied them in your SFM paper. So these concepts relate to the basics of any valuation technique, anything which we need to do in the financial world. These concepts will be used in all the formulas or all the techniques which we are going to study in this entire valuation chapter. So the first concept which we are going to study today is cost of equity, rate of return, or shareholders expectations. So guys, we have studied a formula for cost of equity, cost of debt, weighted average cost of capital since our Inter. But actually, what is it? What is cost of equity? What is cost of debt? So in simple words, absolutely layman words, cost of equity means the price which the company has to pay to use the funds of the shareholders. That is cost of equity. It can be in the form of bonus shares, dividends, a rights issue, any other thing which companies are facilitating shareholders with. Anything can be cost of equity. So any price which the company has to pay for using the debt or using the capital of equity shareholders, that is known as cost of equity. So, but shareholders are our own people. They are the owners of the company. How can we treat their benefits as cost to the company? Again, guys, accounting says that the payments made to shareholders are own payments. However, while valuing, I will say that payments made to shareholders will also be cost to the company, because I am thinking from the company standpoint. I am thinking from a valuation standpoint, and I am divorcing the owners and the company. I am just keeping them apart. So from a company standpoint, from a profit standpoint, whatever I have to shell out from my pocket will be cost for me. Even if for equity shareholders, I'm shelling out dividends for them, that is cost for me. So similarly, as that particular thing is cost for me, for the shareholder guys, it is rate of return. It is return for them. It is their earnings. It is their expectations from the company. That is why the word used is cost of equity or rate of return, shareholders' expectation. Let us see the definition. It refers to the expected return on equity shareholders' funds used by the business. It is in the form of dividends, bonus shares, rights issue given to the equity shareholders. Cost of equity has typically two elements: expected dividend yield and expected growth. So there are two components to the cost of equity bit. It is expected dividend yield, how much dividend are we going to get from a particular share. Second is how much is the share going to expand in terms of its market value. That is known as the expected growth rate. So growth rate and dividends are the two forms of returns which we expect from a particular share, and that is nothing but cost of equity. So this is very basic. We have done it several times in our inter class, in our SFM also. Let us do a question, guys. Illustration number 1 to understand and to compute the cost of capital of a particular company. So compute the cost of capital of Delaware and Company from the following facts. An ordinary dividend of 2 rupees has just been paid. In the past, ordinary dividends have grown at a rate of 10% per annum, and this return is expected to continue. The shares are currently quoted at rupees 27.5 per share. You need to calculate the cost of equity. Yes, sir. Okay, so let's start. Computation of cost of equity of Delaware and Company. So we need to compute the cost of equity, and before starting the solution, let us jot down the data which has been given to us. Recent dividend is rupees 2. Growth rate, the growth which is expected in future, that is to the tune of 10% per annum. Okay, then it says that shares are currently quoted as, so market price of the share rupees 27.5, and these are the three information which are given to us to compute the valuation of this particular cost of equity of this particular company. Now cost of equity comprises of two things, guys. So let me write down the formula first. Cost of equity is equal to expected dividend yield. Cost of equity is equal to expected dividend yield plus growth. So what dividends are expected in percentage form, guys? So we are calculating this entire concept in percentage form. So what is the dividend yield? What is my dividend in terms of percentage giving to me? What is the expected dividend yield? Let me write down how would we calculate the expected dividend yield divided by rupees 27.5. Now please understand this formula or come a logic. What is the logic? Logic is we need to shell out 27.5 rupees from our pockets to earn a dividend of rupees 2 plus 10%. Sir, but we are earning a profit of 2 rupees, not 2 plus 10%. Guys, the 2 rupees dividend is past dividend, which is to be given to the shareholders who have been holding the share in the past years. if you want to find out cost of equity of today, which means if I am valuing this particular share as on today, my cost, my expected return will be the dividend which will be given to me 1 year hence, which is the current dividend plus 10%. That is how dividend is calculated. So expected dividend yield means dividends which are to be earned by the company 1 year from now, the future dividends, that is known as the expected dividend, which is to be given to the a particular investor who is going to invest in the share as on today. So if I'm going to invest in this particular share as on today, I'm not bothered about the past dividends. I am looking forward to the future dividends, and the future dividends are the past dividends plus the growth rate. That is the future dividends amount which I'm going to get. So current dividend plus 10% of future. This is the future expected dividend which I'm going to get. And how much am I going to shell out from my pocket today? It is 27.5. So this is how I'm going to compute the expected dividend yield. And guys, growth percentage is already given to me in percentage terms, so I need not calculate it. It's 10%. My shares are going to grow at this rate, which means I'm going to reap the benefits of the profits which are reinvested into the business. Those profits which are reinvested into the business, those profits are going to give me a return of 10%, which means my capital appreciation will happen to the extent of 10%. Here I am having an implicit assumption, guys, that the 10% rate of growth is not only applicable on dividends but also applicable on the entire company's profits as a whole. So yes, dividend yield plus growth rate. This is my formula for cost of equity. So this comes out to 8% plus 10%, which is 18% per annum. This is the formula for cost of equity, or KE. So yes, I know that you've already studied all these things in your inter and your SFM part, but we have to revise it a bit, guys, because these are basic concepts which I'll be using in the entire chapter, and if you are not able to understand these well, then it will be a difficult situation for you. So yes, this is the first method of computing cost of equity. Please write a conclusion after illustration number 1. Hence, the cost of equity of Delaware and Company, the cost of equity of Delaware and Company is computed as 18% per annum. So the annual cost of equity or the return to the shareholders is computed as 18% per annum. Okay, sir, we got this simple formula. Sir, is there any other way of computing cost of equity? Yes, there is one more way, which is the more popular way for computing cost of equity. That way is, guys, capital asset pricing model, CAPM. Yes, sir, we have studied this model several times in our SFM and inter classes. So yes, that model remains the same, and I'm just going to discuss in brief the formula. What is the formula of CAPM model? So the formula is KE is equal to risk-free rate of return multiplied by beta into market rate of return minus risk-free rate of return. So the formula of KE as per CAPM model is risk-free rate of return plus beta into market rate of return minus risk-free rate of return. Yes, sir, we have mugged up this formula like anything. We are well versed with this formula. We have done all the questions using this formula, and we are absolutely drenched in this formula. We have always used this formula in any kind of SFM calculations of present value, of calculating any future value, everything. We've used this formula extensively, absolutely. So Not going into much details of this formula, but I'm going to tell you what are the underlying principles of this particular formula. So guys, this formula starts with the risk of free rate of return. Risk free rate of return is the rate of return which is given to you under a risk free situation, which means if you're doing a bank FD, then this rate will be given to you, which is 8% or 7.5% or 7%, whichever is the country specific rate. And guys, this rate changes from country to country. So countries which are developing, this rate will be higher. Countries which are developed, this rate will be lower. So if you go to US, then probably FD rates will be less as compared to India. So India is developing, progressing, so its FD rate are reducing. So this risk-free rate of return is never constant, so as to say. In a particular country, it may be constant, but if you see the global scenario, then this risk-free rate of return changes from country to country. So it depends on economy of a particular country that decides this risk-free rate of return. Sir, what is this return, FD return, doing over here? So guys, let's assume you have 4 companies, company A, company B, company C, company D, in the industry where you want to invest your money. There are 4 companies in this particular industry, A, B, C, D. A gives you a return of 18%. B gives you a return of 15%. C gives you a return of say 16%. And D gives you a return of say 20%. This is the company specific rate of return which is given by these companies to you. The market comprises of these 4 companies. There is no other company in the market. So if I ask you broadly, in very rough measure, what is the market rate of return? So you will tell me, sir, 18 plus 15 plus 16 plus 20 divided by 4. It is, sir, approximately 17.25 is the market rate of return. So suppose this is the leather industry, and leather industry is say on a boom in a particular country, so that industry is paying really good dividends and really good returns. 7.25% is the return which is being given by leather industry to a particular investor. You are an investor, you want to invest in leather industry. Now the question before you is whether to invest in A, B, C or D. So the obvious answer is obviously, sir, D, because D is giving you the highest return. Wait a minute. Yes, D is giving you the highest return. But guys, D is also giving you highest risk, because risk is more in D. Higher the risk, higher will be the return. How is D earning high risk, a high return? How? By taking additional risk. And the risk can be in form of debt, using debt capital in your capital structure. That increases your risk, but increases your return as well. So higher the risk, higher will be the return. But the industry as a whole is earning 17.25%. Now as an investor, if I ask you, okay, please tell me what do you want to earn from the leather industry? You will tell me, sir, bare minimum what I want to earn is the fixed deposit rate of interest. So if I employ this money, my money, into fixed deposits, then I'm surely to get 8% return on my fixed deposits, FDRs. So one thing which I'm going to expect from the company is that at least bare minimum give me fixed deposit rate of return. Absolutely right. You are going to first of all expect bare minimum risk free rate of return. Then what is the next thing which you are going to expect? Sir, the next thing is I am investing in leather industry. Sir, leather industry is reaping a benefit of 17.25%. Sir, please give me 17.25% minus what you have already given me. So in total, please give me 17.25% rate of return for my particular investment, because I am investing in a particular industry. The industry is leather industry. Leather industry is reaping a benefit of 17.25%. So please give me totality 17.5%. 8% you've already given me in form of risk-free rate of return. I'm happy with it. Over and above that, please give me the differential of industry rate of return and the risk-free rate of return. This is how you are expecting to gain market return on your particular investment. But now the question is, the differential of these two things, how much out of this particular differential will be given to you will be determined by how much risk are you willing to take. If you are willing to take higher risk, so say for example you are willing to invest in D, if you are willing to take higher risk, then I can even offer you more than 9.25%. This is 9.25%. I can offer you even more than 9.25%, which means I can in totality offer you more than 17.25%. I can offer you if you are willing to take high risk. But if you are willing to take lower risk, so if you are willing to invest in B, which is the lowest risky company, then I'm not even willing to give you entire 9.25%. I will give you less than 9.25%, which means in totality you will earn less than 17.25%. Now depends on you whether you want to invest in D, C, B, A, according to which I'm going to determine a factor, and this factor is nothing but the relationship of risks and reward of a particular company to the entire industry. This relationship is known as beta. Beta is the relationship between risks and rewards of a particular company vis-a-vis the entire industry. So the risk and reward of B vis-a-vis the entire industry is less. The risk and reward relationship of D for Delhi, vis-a-vis the entire industry is more. So depending upon what is the relationship between a particular company and the entire industry, I'm going to fix rewards for you. And that is how beta is calculated. So the formula for CAPM is KE is equal to risk-free rate of return plus beta. Beta is the risk factor, which is multiplied to market risk premium minus risk-free rate of return. So I'll tell you in advance, if you are investing in B, your beta will be less than 1, so that you do not get 17.25 in entirety. Your beta will be less than 1. But if I am investing in D, then your beta will be more than 1, resulting into a return of more than 17.25%. This is how this entire formula works. If beta is 1, then you are going to get exactly the same amount as industry is earning, which is 17.25%. If beta is 1, that means the company is absolutely in sync with the industry, and the direction in which the industry moves in terms of return and risk, the company also moves in the same direction. This is represented by beta 1. If beta is above 1, then this indicates that the company is moving ahead of the industry standards. If beta is less than 1, this indicates that company is behind the industry standards. Company is little less aggressive than industry standards. These are the indicators of beta. So the formula is K is equal to risk-free rate of return plus beta multiplied by market return minus risk-free rate of return. This is the entire formula of cost of equity as per the CAPM model, which is the capital asset pricing model. Perfect, sir. We got a gist of it, and we understand that we have studied it in past, but revising it makes your concept more stronger, and that is what we just did. One very specific thing which I would highlight over here is, guys, please remember the question might give you return on market portfolio, or it might say that risk premium on market portfolio. If it says risk premium on market portfolio, that means it is already deducting risk-free rate of return from the market return, and it is giving you a net figure. If it tells you risk premium or price of risk, that means it is giving you differential. And if it tells you, the question tells you that the return of market portfolio is so and so, that means it is giving you the gross figure. If it tells it is giving you risk premium, then it is giving you the net figure. So you need to understand the difference between how a particular ratio is given to you in the question. So let's see what is the meaning of cost of debt. Similar to cost of equity, guys, cost of debt means the cost which a company has to bear to use funds of the debt holders, which are the lenders of the company, which means loans, debentures, any kind of instruments which have characteristics of debt. All those are included in debt. And what are the characteristics of debt? Characteristics of debt are that there is a fixed interest payment involved with every debt, and there is a stipulated time period when the debt should be repaid by the company to the debt holders. This is debt, and the cost which we have to bear for using that debt is known as cost of debt. Let's study. It refers to price paid by the business for using debt capital in the business. It is in the form of interest paid on debts due. Cost of debt is computed net of taxes because cost of using debt is eligible for tax deduction. So cost of debt is computed on the basis of computed net of taxes, and now as we all are aware that interest cost is eligible to be deducted for tax payments. So if you earn an income of 100 rupees and pay a tax of say 30%, 30 rupees, if you pay interest of say 10 rupees on the loans, then your net income will be reduced by 90, and now you have to pay only the tax amount of only 27 rupees. 90 multiplied by 30% is 27 rupees. You saved how much rupees? 3 rupees you saved. Earlier you were paying tax of 30 rupees. Now you are paying tax of 27 rupees. You save rupees 3. The moment you save rupees 3, this saving is on account of use of debt capital, and therefore the interest which you are paying on debt capital is not 10 rupees. Guys, it is 10 minus 3, 7 rupees, because you get 3 rupees of tax benefit for paying the interest on debt. So cost of debt is always calculated net of tax amount. Cost of equity is not calculated net of tax amount, because cost of equity is always gross of tax, because equity payments are not eligible for tax deductions. Formula which we use is KD is equal to interest into 1 minus tax, where T is the tax rate. So that is the formula for KD. Now sir, if a company uses both equity and debt in its capital structure, what should we do? So there are companies which are using equity, a portion of equity and a portion of debt in their cost structure. Guys, in those cases we use weighted average cost of capital or stakeholders expectations. Now the word used is stakeholders expectations and not shareholders expectations. Stakeholders expectation means it refers to expected cost or price to be incurred for using capital or funds. So the price which is used for incurred for using capital or funds is known as stakeholders expectations. In other words, it is the overall rate of return that must be received by the company on its investment projects to attract investors for investing capital in the firm and to maintain its market value. So the overall cost of capital means an amalgamation of cost of equity and cost of debt in a specific proportion, that is known as overall cost of capital. This is particularly relevant for companies which are using both equity and debt in their capital structure. Now, so how do we calculate this overall cost of capital? Because we are given two rates. Suppose we are given KE, we are given KD. KE is 10%, KD is 8%. Sir, would our overall cost of capital be 18%? 10 plus 8 is equal to 18. Would that be the case? Answer is definitely a no. Guys, to ascertain the overall cost of capital, you have to multiply these figures with weight of equity and weight of debt. The moment you multiply KE by WE and KD by WD and you add both these figures, then you are going to get the overall cost of capital, which is also known as weighted average cost of capital. So to give you a simple example, I bought tomatoes worth rupees 20 per kg. I bought say 5 kgs of tomato. 20 per kg, 5 kgs of tomato. And I bought 50 per kg milk. And I bought 2 kgs of milk. 50 per kg milk, 2 kgs of milk. So there are two products. Milk, how much did I bought milk? Obviously in liters. I bought 2 kgs. And what was the price per kg? It was 50 rupees. I bought tomatoes What were the price of how much kgs? 5 kgs. The price was 20 per kg. What is the total amount which I paid? I paid 100 rupees and 100 rupees, which means I paid a total of 200 rupees. Now if someone has to ask me what is the weighted average cost which you have paid for milk and tomatoes, weighted average means what is the total cost. If we equate both of them, then what is the total cost did you pay? Guys, if you say 70, then you are absolutely wrong, because you did not pay. If we amalgamate these two things, you did not pay rupees 70. Then in toto, what did you pay? Guys, you paid 200 divided by 5 plus 2, 7 kgs. In total, you had bought how much of milk? 2 liters. How much of tomatoes? 5 kgs. So total you bought 7 kgs of ration in your home, and that is 7 kgs, and you had paid 200 for it. So 200 divided by 7 comes out to 28.57. So if I see in totality, what is the average price which you paid for tomatoes and milk consolidatedly? You will say that, sir, we paid 28.57 per kg or per liter. We paid in consolidated form. So 28.57 multiplied by 7 is equal to 200 rupees is what you actually paid. So what did you do in this particular example? Now you multiplied the price of milk with the weight of milk. What is the weight of milk? 2 by 7. Then what did you do? Price of tomatoes multiplied by weight of tomatoes. This is how you came on to the figure of weighted average cost. So 50 divided by 7 multiply by 2. This comes out to 14.28 plus 20 divided by 7, which in total comes out to 28.57. So guys, whenever we are computing cost of equity and cost of debt, the amalgamated form of both of these costs, which is also known as weighted average cost of capital, whenever we are computing weighted average cost of capital, you do not have to add individual costs. You have to take their weights, and then you have to compute the weighted average cost of capital, which will represent an average cost which has been paid by you for using external funds. And in this case, I am classifying equities as also external funds, because from a company perspective, equity shareholders are also external to the company. So I'm classifying both these costs as external cost of funds. Okay, sir, got it. So weighted average cost of capital, companies often run their business using capital they raise through various sources. They include raising money through listing their shares on stock exchange, equity, or by issuing interest-paying bonds or taking commercial loans or debt. All such capital comes at a cost, and the cost associated with each type varies for each source. Weighted average cost of capital is the average after-tax cost of a company's various cost capital sources, including common stock, preferred stock, bonds, and any other long-term debt. In other words, weighted average cost of capital is the average rate a company expects to pay to finance its assets. Following formula may be used. Weighted average cost of capital is equal to cost of equity multiplied by weight of equity plus cost of debt into tax rate, net of tax rate, multiplied by weight of debt, where cost of equity, cost of debt, and weight of equity, weight of debt is given as the underlying words. Okay, so this is the formula of weighted average cost of capital, which yes, we have studied several times. So let us test our acumen and let us test our knowledge with respect to computing the weighted average cost of capital. So let's start illustration number 1A. The following information is given for three companies that are identical except for their capital structure. Total invested capital, same for all the three companies, orange, red, and blue, 1 lakh, 1 lakh, 1 lakh. Debt asset ratio, 80%. So debt asset ratio is given, guys, So which means debt to total capital ratio is given and not debt to equity ratio. So assets represent the total capital and debt represents the debt element of that particular capital. 80%, 50% and 20%. So if I were to ask you what is the equity to capital ratio of Orange, what will you say? Sir, it is 20%. Equity is 20%, debt is 80%, 100% is the total assets or total capital of that particular company. Shares outstanding 6100, 8300, 10,000. Pre-tax cost of debt 16%, 13%, 15%. Cost of equity 26%, 22% and 20%. Operating income EBIT 25,000, 25,000 and 25,000. Net income 8970, 12350, 14950. The tax is uniform 35% in all cases. Number one, compute the weighted average cost of capital. The first thing which we need to compute is the weighted average cost of capital. Then second is, if industry PE ratio is 11 times, estimate the price for share of each company. PE ratio is given to you, you have to estimate the market price per share. Guys, what is this PE ratio? We'll be discussing in detail in the going forward lectures, but to give you a brief formula, market price per share divided by EPS is price earning ratio. Calculate the estimate market capitalization for each of the companies. Now what is this market capitalization? Guys, market capitalization means market price per share multiplied by number of shares. That is market capitalization. What is the total capital which is held by a particular company in the market as a whole is known as market capitalization. So these are the three things which we need to compute. So let's start with the first part. Computation of weighted average cost of capital. The formula is KE multiplied by weight of E and KD multiplied by weight of D. So cost of equity multiplied by weight of equity and cost of debt multiplied by weight of debt. Okay, so we have to find out this weighted average cost of capital, guys, for all the three companies. So the three companies are Orange, Red and Blue. These are the three companies. So the information which is given to us is, first of all, weight of debt is given to us, which is given in the form of debt assets ratio. This is weight of debt. So weight of debt would be required to compute the weighted average cost of capital, because we need to multiply the weight of debt with the cost of debt. This is 0.8, 0.5 and 0.2. Now if I were to ask you what is the weight of equity, the weight of equity will be 1 minus circle 1. So I hope you understand what I've written, 1 minus circle 1. So I will subtract the above figures from 1 and I'll get weight of equity. Third one should be cost of equity. Let's see if we can get cost of equity. Yes sir, it's already given, 26%, 22%, 20%. This is the cost of equity. Now let us see if we can get cost of debt, but the cost of debt which we want should be net of taxation. Yes sir, it should be net of taxation. So pre-tax cost of debt is 16%. 16% multiplied by 65%. Similarly, 13% multiplied by 65%. Similarly, 15% multiplied by 65%. Guys, where did I fetch this figure of 65% from? It is 1 minus 35%. 35% is the tax rate, and 1 minus 35% represents the 65% of net of tax figure. Okay, sir. So this is the cost of debt. Now if I were to ask you what is the weighted average cost of capital, you will easily be able to compute it by using a simple formula. So 1 multiplied by 4 plus 2 multiplied by 3. 1 multiplied by 4 plus 2 multiplied by 3. Yes sir, we got it. %17.95%. So guys, these are the weighted average cost of capitals which we have computed using the simple formula cost of equity multiplied by weight of equity plus cost of debt multiplied by weight of debt. 13.52%, 15.25% and 17.95%. So let us conclude the answer. Please write hence the weighted average cost of capital, hence the weighted average cost of capital of orange, red and blue is computed as 13.52%, 15.225% and 17.95% respectively. Okay sir, let's come on to the second part of the question, and second part requires you to computation of MPS of the companies given that the PE ratio is 11 times. We need to compute the MPS of the three companies. We are given that the P ratio is 11. So you know the formula of P ratio. P ratio is market price per share divided by earnings per share. So if I were to reverse this formula, guys, then the formula of market price per share becomes P ratio multiplied by earnings per share. I already know the P ratio, which is 11. So if you can just find out the EPS for me, I'll be able to compute the market price per share. Sir, we'll be able to find out the EPS very easily. We have been given the net income. We have the number of shares with us. So sir, EPS will be net income divided by number of shares. Net income is 8970, 12350, 14950. Net income we are taking. We are not taking EBIT. We are taking net income. Net income means it is after reduction of taxes, interest, and any other claims. So guys, number of shares is 6100, 8300, 10,000. What is the EPS? Let's compute the EPS. So this should also be rounded off to 2 decimal places. Guys, always round off the EPS to 2 decimal places at least, if not 3. 3 is a preferable number, but if not 3, then at least 2 is bare minimum required. And all the rounding off will be done up to 5, up to 4 it will be to the previous number, and beyond 4, that is 5 to 9, it will be the next number. This we already know. So we have computed the EPS of all the 3 companies. Now if I give you the PE ratio of all the 3 companies, which is 11, 11 and 11, then I'm easily going to compute the MPS, which will be computed by multiplying 3 and 4. Yes, sir. So this is the market price per share of all the 3 companies, given that these 3 companies are wanting a PE ratio or yielding a PE ratio of 11. So let's conclude. Hence, the market price per share of orange, red and blue, hence the market price per share of orange, red and blue is computed as rupees 16.17, rupees 16.39 and rupees 16.5 respectively. Okay, so the last part requires you to compute the market capitalization. Okay, so here also I think we should write the formula. MPS is equal to EPS multiplied by PE ratio. Similarly, market capitalization is equal to MPS into number of shares. So again, for the three companies, orange, red and blue, let us see what is the market price per share. Market price per share we've just computed. Let us see what are the number of shares. So we will get to know about the market capitalization, which is 1 multiplied by 2. Number of shares are given in the question: 6100, 8300 and 10,000. So let's see what is the market capitalization of these three companies. 16.17. One 36037 and 16 point, this comes to 1,65,000. So this is the market capitalization for all the three companies: 98,637, 1,36,037 and 1,65,000. Let's conclude the answer for the third part. Conclusion is, hence the market capitalization of orange, red and blue, of orange, red and blue is computed as rupees 98,637, 1,36,037 and 1,65,000 respectively. So yes, this is the basics of the valuation subject as a whole. We need to compute the cost of equity, cost of debt and weighted average cost of capital. And yes, we have learned in this session that how to compute these costs. So in the next session, we'll be discussing some more basic concepts, and then finally we'll be moving on to the main mergers and acquisition chapter. So yes, that's all for this particular video session. We'll be meeting in the next video in the next session. Till that time, all the very best and happy studying.